Welcome to the Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Lauren Lane. For over 50 years, the LSI team has been dedicated to the science of business development. We've seen the impact of our work and how it's evolved into economic development and now social impact work. This week, we have the opportunity to sit down with our longtime collaborator and colleague, Josh Johnson. At the time of this recording, Josh was working for another firm in Washington, D.C., but has since rejoined the LSI team. Sean and Josh will discuss the fallout of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as IIJA, and give an insider look into the $2 billion Inflation Reduction Act and funding opportunities, as well as the future of the 8A program. Let's jump in.
Since we haven't talked for a while, just talk about your background and some of the things you're doing now. Because I do think it's very interesting.
Yeah, so it's great to be here. Sean, you and I have stayed in touch, and going back to the early days of life to even now, where previously I was working with you on a variety of things, and have since gone to a small entity in which one of the things that I always had wanted in my career is to have the opportunity to understand how a business thinks, and particularly a small business. And I know that I dealt with a lot when I was after I left the Congress to go and provide guidance and counsel to folks on how they could grow their business. But what I've found actually having to lead that, it's been in many cases life changing, because I've had to take, where your day to day, week to week really depends upon what's coming in, and how do you immediately address that with looking towards the future. So the tactical side of business, and I know that even large ones are thinking this way as well, but just the day to day tactics of who are we, where are we positioned, what are we looking at for next week, what is and even getting to the point of the bottom line is how many things are we submitting with who. I'd say the bulk of the work that we're doing is we're on the commercial side, which of course is day to day. Is today is 6 projects, 10 projects. What's tomorrow? What's the next week? And I've really enjoyed that. Where I've always kind of looked at the long term, which is great, but at the same time, losing sight of the day to day activities and what's happening, you can shut a business down. And so, and as we know, I mean, people come in and out on the consulting side, and I think this experience has made me recognize what's happening. I mean, I'll give you a day activity on. So I'm running all the federal side and the partnerships of a company that's really doing well with the commercial side of what they do. And they, in a nutshell, they basically, if you have an issue that needs to be resolved, they are the team that would go in on a facility side. So gas line breaks, plumbing challenges, trees through the roof. I mean, but solely on a commercial. So the stuff that facility management groups don't want to do, they don't have the capacity, but they need to in order to, as they would always say, to stop the bleeding. How do you get in and fix something so that it opens up the next day, or it opens up the same day? And so a lot of we have dispatcher folks all around me, continuing to relieve the pain on a lot of entities. And then my role has been is the federal government, what's their needs in this area. But it's been interesting to see the federal government in light of the same capacity that these guys have.
I bet. And you are so right. I mean, I really look at this similar to a farmer planting his or her seeds, cultivating that. I mean, that takes a lot of time up front, and there's no revenue coming in. And then balancing, how do I sell my crop versus, making sure there's enough in the pipeline, doing the strategy piece, the execution, and the sales piece is so. And this is what I've really wrestled with my whole career, and as a small business, you can see this that it's everything. You're doing it all. You're doing setting the vision, setting the strategy, ensuring that you have enough in the pipeline you're going to be able to make payroll on the back end, balancing operations and new business and sales to keep things going. And if you don't have a good strategy for all of those disciplines, it doesn't work. And I'm sure that has been fascinating for you over the last year and as you've done this.
Mhm.
So what I've always thought you've had this very interesting background, and there's not a lot of people that can say this, where you spent all this time in the House of Representatives, all this time in the U.S. Senate, and then now have had you spent almost 10 years with us, and now working with this and running this 8A small business. I mean, you've got a perspective from the beginning all the way to delivery, which is just so unique. Is there anything other than what we just talked about? Is there anything in particular that or insight that you've gleaned, looking back on the last 30 plus years of your career?
Yeah, I think what's probably the most fascinating is, particularly now, is, when I have an area that I'm focused on, it's my issue, it's Josh's issue, and it's easy for me to say, but this is this other person. The reason why this didn't go forward is blank blank didn't do this, or she didn't do it, he didn't. And I've learned very quickly that buck stops with me. That if whatever reason I'm moving on a project and it doesn't go through, I can't say it was someone else. It was me. And I think that from the small business perspective, where I grew up in the Congress for 20 years, it was easy to say, oh, it was someone else.
Yeah.
And when I left the Congress and came over to LSI, it was very easy to say, this is somebody else. The company's not doing what I've said, or it's another staff that's doing it. And I never really took that perspective. Now that I have, is no, I mean, if this is going to work, I got to make it work. It's I have to, in working with in making this happen, do it. And I'll give you an example. So I had always thought that a way for companies to grow is partnerships and teaming with folks who have the past performance. And I provided that guidance a lot. But I'd never been in the role where, okay, now I'm doing it. And so the reason why I really wanted to have this experience is to step into that side where, rather than providing some advice, actually execute. So it was odd, because now I come in and I'm like, you gotta do this. This is what will work. Okay, do it. And now I have to do it and see if it works. And what I have realized, it does. It's the model that you and I have spoken about for so long works for entities. And I'll give you right now an example. We've created this year. We're part of us. We're in a service disabled joint venture where we're women owned, waiting our 8A with minority owned, and then the service disabled is a hub zone and an 8A. And so that alone brings in so many opportunities for us to go after. But what it did for us immediately is, there is a large contract that you and I have spoken about. The way the government's moving is these multiple award contracts. And if you're not on them, you're going to see issues continually arise each day through pipeline that this opportunity came out. But that is 2% of all the opportunities are coming through SAM.gov, and then the other, 90 plus are going through task orders for people on those contracts. And so, fortunately, we were, in this case, able to submit. We're still waiting to get on it. And this is thanks to the help of people at LSI, was to be able to go on to an OASIS contract, as they have 5 areas that for small business. Our joint venture qualified under 4 of those 5, so that anytime a task is issued, whether it's economic disadvantage or disabled, whether it's a hub zone or whatever it might be, or woman owned, we can compete under that. And there's multiple domains that right now we're just under the facilities if we get on. But that, when you're looking at a contract that had a value, the previous one, of $60 billion from 2014 in task, if you're not on that, you did not see $60 billion worth of effort. And
Exactly.
so that to me is on the tactical side. You and I have spoken continually about that, the tactical side. Now being where I have to think about that, and that's long term. So just know that that opportunity may not see fruits for a bit, but if we didn't get on it, we won't see anything.
That's
We
right.
won't see the 60 billion or plus dollars. The other thing what was interesting is a lot of the fascination we had with you know Indian-owned, tribally owned companies was something I'd always thought about and just recognized that if you're looking at dis- disenfranchised and where this could work, is structuring that. And so we also structured this past, over the past 9 months, or I'd say over the past 2 months now, this Indian-owned company, and it's Navajo owned, which opens up a variety of opportunities that we're sharing our capabilities with this firm, and they're sharing their capabilities. And it's a good fit to where we can now go after what the Department of Interior and Bureau of Indian Affairs, Indian Health Services are pushing out under the Buy Indian Act. And so another area that has been nice to collaborate with you on has been there's another opportunity with basically digitizing 12 million documents that the Navajo Nation is looking to need assistance on. Now we're just working through the proposal now to submit, but joining, with your capabilities with to help us develop and understand how to do that, and then go after this. It's on, that's a life changing to the firm itself, to our firm, but to all the people that would be hired under that. So I think I went from the very big picture of potentially laying the blame on someone else to now the only blame is why didn't I get up and call this person about this opportunity I saw, and it's my problem. It's Josh's problem. It's not someone else's problem.
Exactly. Well, one of the things that we wanted to do in this session with you is you and I have known each other most of our lives. I think I first met you 1980, 1979, 1980. I mean, does that sound right? Maybe even
Yeah,
earlier. 19, maybe even, 1978 even. Is when we
mhm,
first met, and stayed in contact all of these years, including all that time you were in the House and Senate. I'd come see you when I was in DC. The one thing I tell people about you is that you're a wonk at heart, that you love policy, and I know that you just cannot give up following some of this interesting policy work that has happened, especially over the last 3 years. And especially the work we're in, this unprecedented policy and appropriation that has happened in the last 3 years post COVID is just some of the it's historic. It really is. I mean, we talk about once in a generation events like IIJA, like the Inflation Reduction Act, and just some of the general policy that the Congress is passing. It's frustrating, I know, for a lot of people, and unfortunately, what I'm seeing throughout the U.S., even in D.C., like people are so is frustrated. They don't understand it. They hate this battle between the parties, and so they're done following it. They won't even, they're not even. They've stopped following the IIJA work and policy that is so critical for the next 10 years of our economy. And so I'd like to just, if you're okay with this, I mean, we can go in any direction you want, but what I'd love to get from you is number one, it's been almost a year since we did our last IIJ update, and a lot's happened. A lot hasn't happened, but a lot's happened in that time. I'd love your perspective on IIJA. I'd love your perspective on Inflation Reduction Act, which I think is critical. And then if we have time, the last thing I'd like your perspective on, which I know you're following closely, is the 8A program in general. Does that sound like a good agenda for the
Sure.
discussion? So let's start with IIJA. Just in summary, if somebody is not familiar with IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, passed 2 years ago almost now, really been most of the funding that has been obligated and has been pushed has happened in the last 9 months, a little bit before that, but most of that has happened in the last 9 months. But over $2 trillion obligated, appropriated under IIJA, and I'm estimating that they have spent maybe 400 billion. That's still a ton of money, but it's a fraction of what the vision, the $2 trillion vision of IIJA was. That's what we're seeing. And a lot of the agencies now are in a panic. They're inside 12 months when this soft line in the sand has been issued by the Congress. You better have that money at least obligated. We're pulling it back. So I'd love your perspective on that. Is there still I think there's a mandate from some of the members. No, we're going to pull this money back 1 October 2024 if you don't have this obligated. I think some of the, especially the Senate members, are saying, no, you're not. But I would love your perspective on that. I'd love your perspective on what you're seeing with IIJA and what opportunity still exists, because I feel this urgency, and a lot of the agencies and the true decision makers are ramping up. We've got to get this done. What are you seeing with IIJA?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that how you approached it, LSI, from day one, this money is no longer the need for congressional relations, government relations, and going and saying, give me an earmark. And so that recognition, and I know that the clients you have received multiple millions of dollars, 10 millions, dollars in awards through this. And that is still has not caught on in the city, that this Congress continues to operate what they think it should look like from decades ago when times are changing. And so, as we know so well, folks are going over $800,000, $1 million. Congress people are saying, I can only take in 5 requests. And here you have entities that nobody knows who they are. In many cases, they hear an announcement of they were just awarded $80 million.
Right.
And it's fascinating to me that we're now going into this, second, third year of this, and hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars is going out the door for projects in which there's no role per se for the Congress other than potentially a latter day oversight hearing to say, geez, why did we give $260 million to this entity to do environmental justice? Whether it's good or bad, it's another thing. It's just no one's questioning this. So as it comes to the IIJA, I still think the model that you've done and have with clients is the model that, fortunately, you're one of the few that are doing it. And there are folks that need this help. And it's not, again, capturing 100,000, 200,000. We're talking 30, $40 million at a time for really good projects. You can state that the purpose, for moving into other arenas of energy in many cases may not be the fit across all spectrums, but there is a fit for that. And I think taking advantage of how this is evolving. The other thing that I've thought about is, having left the Congress, it really is, if I were to go back in, having the same debates that we had 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and everybody else is changing. So you have an administration that has changed and is now basically pushing money out. It's pushing money out by younger folks, and policies that that are maybe it's the way forward, but Congress hasn't recognized that yet. And I think this IIJA is really showing that, and this IRA in particular is. And so, to give you a thought on this one, EPA, if we had a government, if we had to continuing resolution, which is could be likely the case come November 17th, that says all agencies you're going to have to operate at your previous year. EPA has the authority to spend money under this Investment Act as well as this Inflation Act on projects in which Congress would normally have had to authorize. They were given the ability to appropriate new money, and they have to push out in one area alone in environmental justice, working with these disenfranchised communities, over $2 billion. They still are able to move, whether or not Congress passes, whether or not they actually increase the budget of the agency or these new starts. And I don't think that realization's hit, folks, that there is this money that can be spent, even though the Congress is coming to a train wreck like they normally do. But this train wreck does nothing to stop what many of them say is frivolous spending. And, again, I'm saying that just how they're arguing it, while many of the clients that you're working with see this as, in many cases, this franchise community now can survive, or this energy direction we're going is good for Arizona, or it's good for wherever the client's interested in moving. So those are just a couple observations that I've had thinking about this.
I love that. You're exactly right. Maybe I mean it's almost like Congress, thinks that, hey, we've got this ability to mandate the operations of the agencies. Most of the agencies have so much money still sitting there, and at least until the end of this fiscal year. Now we're 24 days into this fiscal year, so they've got another 11 months to play with this nearly $1.6 trillion that's still outstanding there. You're exactly right. I think the agencies are marching down their own path. They're doing their own thing, and they are not taking a lot of direction from the Congress right now because they've got so much funding to play with.
There's an interesting. I was listening to a Brookings Institute. I don't know what to call it. It was a gathering of folks who have interest in the Inflation Reduction Act, and it was over 2 hours of just folks commenting on the good that it's doing that nobody knows and doesn't recognize. And they use 7 out of 10 Americans don't know what that is. I would say 9 out of 10 is even pushing it. So. But one of the comments that came up is, look, we're similar to whatever administration is always addressing permitting issues for energy related, whether it's coal fired or whether it's solar or whatever it might be. So the direct conversation they were having is, we can go about still working administratively on getting permitting done, and without Congress even getting engaged. A lot of the NEPA related work, the environmental work, they're proceeding without Congress being engaged. And so that recognition, and then the funding is there. The funding is available for them to continue to do things in which, depending on what side you're on, are very tough issues, and which Congress generally calls hearings to do. The House has been out since October 3rd. They don't have a speaker.
No.
And even if they did, what do? You have an administration that says, we want to permit these, and we know states don't like them in some cases, but it might be a wind project or a solar project, but we're going to permit them. And they have the funding to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you and I had met with a lot of members after IIJA was passed. And when we positioned IIJA to them as, hey, has the Congress ever delegated appropriation in the history of the U.S. previously? I think that was a wake-up call for a lot of the members that hadn't thought of it that way. That's exactly what we're doing. We're delegating appropriation. I mean, so much battle over this continuing resolution are the line items in the budget that the Congress is responsible for. the last 2 years, there's $2 trillion sitting in the agencies that they've had very little control over.
Yeah, it is. It's just fascinating to me that, and this comes to that tactical question. We have members who are true believers and are looking at the long term, which they need to. But from a tactical, you need to look at the day to day.
Definitely.
They're not. The day to day is what can I be doing in my district or in my state that is bringing in the infrastructure needed for my communities that are challenged, that are trying to figure out how to, pay for kids' schooling or whatever it might be, and they are so caught up in the long term, and that we need a solution to this that the day to day is moving without them. And it's kind of going back to the earlier comment I made is I see that now where I'm having to strive every day to say, what can we do differently? Who can we work with in
Yeah.
order to make tomorrow fruitful? And they're getting caught up in this kind of long term. Yes, it will get better. Yes, we're going to solve this. Well, okay, but you can't just, you know, shut everything down and not do anything when things are marching along. Right now, I'm sure they're issuing new grants for under the IIJA and bill. I mean, there's announcements every other day with what the money's going out the door to helping these communities. And then, as we've described, many of the members may put out a press. Some may put out a press release, but many are not even aware of that.
Exactly. What we're finding, we just won a very large grant using IIJ funds out of the Department of Commerce that was it was a wild idea that we thought had little hope of being funded and awarded to this client. I mean, it was pretty far afield of what the department typically would invest in. And that our contact inside of Commerce just basically said, my position right now is if someone comes to me, if a organization, a municipality, a state agency, even a commercial or nonprofit comes to me with an idea that I believe aligns with the general IIJA concept of creating long-term prosperity, jobs, all of the criteria outlined in the administration's guidebook on IIJA, he says, I award it. And even if I hadn't thought of this, even if this was just this completely new concept, which this idea was, I'm going to award it because I don't know what's going to happen at the end of fiscal year 2024, the 30th of September. Does all that money evaporate? So I mean, we really are advising our clients today that, number one, don't be afraid if you think it can align with the general IIJA concept of creating long-term prosperity for disenfranchised communities and demographics through whatever, through infrastructure, through ecosystem creation, all of the social justice projects. Let's do it. It's worth the capture time and a small proposal investment, usually 20 to 30 pages, to get that in front of a decision maker because it likely will happen. And we have firsthand experience where there was no RFP, there was no even thought of this idea before we presented it to this decision maker, and it went through in a minute. So I mean, I felt like over especially the last few months, that there's been this, people have forgotten, there's still $1.5 trillion sitting out there in the IIJ funds at the various agencies. And we need to, the window's closing on this. We need to go after it. I don't know if you've experienced that as well. And then I've got a question at the end of this, but I'll let you comment. Do you see that with the agencies from your perspective?
Yeah, and I think it goes to that. you're only as good as what you do right now. And so one of my daily morning things is every single source saw an RFI that has maybe something we can do. It could be a light bulb change.
Ah,
It could be, sweeping something, or it could be something in which I know someone else does. I I reply immediately to that contracting person saying, "Hey, we have this capability, and by the way, what we bring to your table is three other entities with our under our umbrella that really offer a comprehensive approach to this." And so I do think that this whole idea of coming in, I think right now the government's very interested in what are you doing jointly, and what are you doing jointly to help. And in the end, you still have the bottom line to make, to meet. But this past week, for example, you had a whole group of entities that came together to use, in this case, not bill funding, Inflation Reduction Act funding to do solar at health facilities in disenfranchised areas. So, is that a business line? You bet it is for the solar people. Is it a business line for the health providers? You bet it is. Does it make sense, and is it helpful to the low income? Of course. So you just had somebody who came together saying, "Hey, you guys are hospitals. You're in low income areas. We do solar, and we know how to do financing in the private sector. Let's go after these incentives as well as funding and do it." And to me, that thinking, which is what you were describing, is something that is bringing multiple people to address multiple challenges, is what I see from the grant standpoint they're wanting. But I also see it from the government on the contracting side, is being able to bring in a capable team that is thinking literally outside the box and how they're addressing it, and helping shape that. I mean, you talk shaping all the time, with whether it's grants or contracts. What I find is, on my daily basis, is, the buck stops here. When this contract comes out, if it's an RFP and my thoughts weren't a part of that, what can I do next time to refine it so that this conversation going forward with the RFP or the solicitation, whatever it might be, considers, the effort put in to let them know we're interested, and this is the why, which is, the why in this case would be YLSI, or where I'm at, the YJHS.
exactly. One of the things that I mean, I just cannot get clarity on, and I think that it's still uncertain, even by most of the agencies, is when. I mean, I know that initially the idea was we're going to have these funds available for a 6-year period of time. Was that the initial idea? I mean, meaning that it was almost like 6-year funding when the Congress pushed the act initially. There was not a lot of guidance from the administration on when really must these funds be obligated. There was some uncertainty there, meaning that while it was 6-year funding, when would the funds have to be obligated and then the project's completed? That was pretty ambiguous. Last year we started, even it was the first of this year in the change of the Congress, that there were a lot of, coming out of the House, there were a lot of members saying, if that money's not obligated by the 30th of September 2024, we're going to demand that all of that funding roll back into the Treasury, and we're going to absorb that. So there has been this urgency that there's this burning platform we're working against. What are you hearing about that? Is that still, I mean, is that still a concern? Is it going to go out to, I mean, I've heard 2026. There's a lot of things floating out there. Have you heard anything definitive as to when the Congress is going to continue to allow new grants to be awarded? That's in the end, that's what we're really ultimately concerned about. When is the last date that an IIJ grant will be awarded? I'm not so worried about when the projects are completed, but when can you how long do we have before the last grant is awarded under IIJA?
So I'll kick it to the BI, the Inflation Reduction IRA. So an example there is EPA in their environmental justice, which was, I don't know, $75 million before IRA came around. They have to push out the door $2 billion by FY26. If they don't, then that does resort back to the Treasury. So now we have $2 billion that they can spend right now. They have appropriations authority to spend that, even if they don't get their, for new starts, new grant starts. So just in that case, there is a fine line. But what we're doing is we're saying, okay, they are the ones that can do new projects. These are focused on disenfranchised communities. Then they're going to push that money out. They're going to find ways to push out that amount of money for environmental justice, which we again know is that 40% of projects. In this case, it's 100% of that funding. So as it comes to the investment, act, that what I just looked briefly this morning at opportunities that are open, that to give you a sense of the amount of funding. I'll use the Inflation Reduction Act. Just with the EPA, and of course, some of these have our ceilings that are above what's there. $4.7 billion is currently being looked at over the next while. That still is going out, and that improves. That's everything from water infrastructure to greenhouse gas emissions. But you start getting into what you were talking about with commerce. I mean, they're doing money from sea level rise to looking at how do you take, debris removal, in marine areas. I mean, these are not just $800,000 opportunities. These are in the millions, and in some cases, tens of millions of dollars. And so, just alone for money that is potentially out there, whether or not they have the funding tied to it yet, it's over just in that $11 billion in open opportunities just right now. I mean, that's just as we the lay the for the IRA. Now, if you go to the infrastructure law, they have just for opportunities that are open and available right now over $19 billion. And so we're arguing in many cases for a few 100,000 here and there. They're pushing out for Fish Patch, coastal connectivity, $70 million. That's due just in the next few weeks to fund. And so even if we're looking long term, the short term is numbers that are unheard of when it comes to pushing money out under a grant, not under the FAR, under a requirement from a grant making agency that is going to already be different than the traditional way they push grants out, with recommendations on to waive certain things or to add certain things, in which, as you described so well with commerce, talking with the grant entity that here's why we're doing it and how we want to proceed. If it's a good idea and it makes sense with the long term, you're going to get short term funding to begin a process that could be, tens of millions of dollars in several years in doing.
So I think the best advice that I have been giving to our clients, and as even a lot of people on the Hill, how they should approach IIJA, what's the status is. Maybe we don't have a definitive date as to when those funds are no longer going to be available and able to be obligated by the agencies. I mean, I do think that at some point, maybe as part of the continuing resolution, that there is going to be some language and policy agreed to. This is the line in the sand. I think it needs to happen. I think it will happen. But between now and over the next 11 months, between now and the 30th of September next year, there is a huge opportunity to go in, even unsolicited, no RFP. I mean, you're right. We're seeing a flood of RFPs coming out of these agencies because the agencies feel this as well. But going in, doing the capture work with a concept that meets the criteria of IIJA, job creation, long-term prosperity for disenfranchised communities, looking at how energy and remediation and whatnot can be included in this, you're going to get funding for that. And it's not a lot of time and investment. I mean, it is a few meetings with the right decision makers so that they understand the concept. The proposals are typically under 50 pages. I mean, that includes all of the DEI. And if you want tactical explanations of what Josh and I have talked about in the past as to how you build this out, listen to some of those prior episodes of this podcast. But there's such an opportunity to go in, meet with the decision makers inside the agencies. I think part of it is finding the right champion in these agencies, making sure that you're in the right bucket for this funding, building a short proposal and winning that business. It's just, there's so much opportunity there. So, I mean, you said something earlier. I've got to say that this is funny. We did one of our first episodes that we did after IIJA was passed that, like I said, is one of these episodes that now has a million downloads, right, Lauren? It was Fire Your Lobbyists. Remember we did that episode several years ago. We got a lot of flack for that. I think you even more than I did. Like all of your friends on the Hill saying, what are you guys doing to us? I mean, we said this in the beginning. It was sort of a tongue-in-cheek, fire your lobbyists. But I mean, even today, the reason that we're working with other policy groups is there's a lot of important policy and ongoing appropriation on the Hill that we need that subject matter expertise. But for IIJA, that funding, that there is nothing that the Congress is going to do to influence your award. If you're a municipality, if you're a state agency, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a commercial contractor, it's gone until the Congress finally says no more. We're going to, whatever's left in your account, we're pulling it back, which I think they're going to do. You need to be with the agencies. We're not saying that there's not policy and future appropriations that are going to be needed. In fact, we did we did more earmarks last year and got more earmarks passed last year in the last Congress than we have since 2010. So
Yeah, I think that's a good marriage. I think we've talked about this for years. I chose not to go that route because I literally knew a handful of folks who I would hire as a lobbyist. Fortunately, one of the ones you have is with Bennett Group. So just knowing that you have someone who understands and the team that understands this is huge. And also, they can't do all this work that does in the end position these companies they're working with to win work such as the grants or such as the contracts in which really meet if they're representing an energy client. It's great to get some policy in there, but it's also great to go win a $60 million project that has permitting funding tied to it as well. So I think that, having that force will kind of what we've always described will really change the approach of firms in DC for the better. And fortunately, you're the first one doing this. So it'll be a good few years.
So much of this was your vision, Josh. I mean, we've talked about this for decade. And let's face it, this was your idea a decade ago, and it's fun to finally see this come together with a lot of other really amazing agencies that we work with as well on the Hill. And you were responsible for that line of business where you saw that vision. I was just thinking about that's amazing work. Here's the other thing. I don't know if your friends on the Hill have told you this, but we just took over the first floor of 101 Constitution. So when you're on the Hill, come across the street and see us because we've got that whole first floor now. How about that?
It is the greatest building in DC. So I love that building. I think that's a great area.
I know that Lauren is sad that we left the Grange, but this is amazing. I'm excited for everybody to see this. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm sure you're following this closely, is what is the status and future of the 8A program? Maybe you could just, I mean, even the Apex Accelerator, what was formerly PTAC, a lot of the SBA offices, there's just a lot of confusion on what is the current status and future of the 8A program.
Yeah, it's a tough one because we find ourselves in the mix of this. We had submitted over a year ago for women-owned 8A, and what's interesting is recently we were received additional paperwork that they were looking for, and it was fascinating that it was tied to, again, have you felt, I mean, kind of on the reason why it was created. And I can speak specifically, a woman-owned federal-run business, you are up against 99.99% men who are not going to give the credit needed or get you in the door or get the contracts. And so it's a pretty straightforward thing from my perspective that a woman-owned business that is functioning and to say, have you experienced any sort of pushback being a woman-owned? I would venture to say almost any woman-owned business would say yes. So I do think that there are going to be issues that you're going to further refine, that there is still kind of this network of what people think contracting is, and there are folks that are still feeling that, I don't want to say discrimination, but feeling like that they're not at the table like they should be. So from my perspective, I think you're going to see this go forward and ultimately the program resume. There'll probably be some interesting tidbits about how people have leveraged different things and who should benefit, not benefit. But coming from a woman-owned perspective, I think it's a program that needs to be there, and fortunately we were in before they halted all applications, so we'll see how that unfolds. But I think no one really knows yet, but I'm encouraged that at least they're still pushing forward about why this was created in the first place. And I think you can get at some of the folks who've taken advantage of different things, and that's probably how it should have been looked at, not necessarily bring a whole system to a halt when there are good reasons why that program's in place.
So the way I understand it was that the SBA said that they were going to halt any approval of 8A applicants earlier this year. Was that
Yeah,
what you understood as well?
in the August timeframe is when that came out.
And the reason for that was unclear as well. Did you hear any why the 8A decided to suspend the program? I mean, was there
Yeah,
policy?
there was, and I don't know specifically about there was a push initially on that. So I don't know the early details on it, but I do know that at least from the perspective of the program, that there is a push to reform but keep why it was structured in the first place. When you start looking at why the IIJA, the Inflation Reduction, or go through these things, there's a reason why those were put in place, because regardless of what we say we're doing, there are disenfranchised communities. Now, are some folks taking advantage of them? Yes, and you fix those, but you don't stop a whole program because of some challenges or a feeling of this isn't right, because and I'll give you an example of legislation. So I think one of my biggest successes legislatively was I go into a room and we had a legislation we want to move, and I pull it out and we'd say, okay, guys, is this okay in this? Yes. Is this okay? Yes. Is this okay? Yes. Is this okay? No. So we get through and we say, okay, 90% of this is okay. Now let's roll up our sleeves and address the 10%. And if we can't get the 10%, the 90% should still go forward. And I think this is why Congress isn't functioning well, why a lot of things aren't functioning well. And then going to the SBA program is that you don't shut a program down because of some badness that occurred. You shut down the badness, and the other 90% you continue to grow and get them to the position where they can compete commercially or with anybody else because of that benefit. So I don't know the specific details, but again, it's terrible policy when you kill a pro or stop a program because of a few issues that are arising rather than just addressing that head on and making the regulation towards that.
I think it's and there is a lot of still. I think there's a lot of ambiguity. My understanding is, as of today, the criteria really is if you can show you're Native American, Alaska Native, Hawaiian Native, you're granted 8A status as of today. That there needs to be a long narrative for justifying your disadvantaged status if you don't fall into one of those categories. But I think it would be, I think this would be an interesting episode. We really have not seen a lot of significant changes, although the Super 8A program really did for several years, really did capture the imagination of a lot of these agencies. Like, wow, I could go to a Super 8A and put $1 billion. Maybe that has a lot of that has gone away because they've had the ability to issue these grants for $1 billion and not necessarily needed a contract vehicle or a social program such as the 8A program to award these big contracts. But I think
I like that idea. I know my owner of the company would be
that'd be great.
willing to be part of a couple other perspectives about the program and why it should continue. Because she's exceptional, but she would raise the issue that being a minority women-owned business and the challenges and why the 8A program what it was set up to do.
Why it's critical.
Help grow.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's been great, Josh. I mean, this, like I said, there's been very few episodes where we've had, somebody that's been on more than once. You now hold the title, I think, right, Lauren, the most requested and like I said, most downloaded episodes in the last 100 episodes of Behind the Wind. So appreciate you carving out this time, and I'm so glad that things are going well. I look forward to seeing you when I'm in DC in the next few weeks. I'd love to get together and catch up. And anything else? I mean, we'll link your new contact information in the episode notes and link to your company and
Great.
So that people can get a hold of you. And I look forward to seeing you in DC when I'm there next.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We can go eat hit some of our ethnic food joints where people don't know this. Josh has the best secret ethnic foods throughout the northern capital region of anybody I've known. I mean, we found some hole in the walls that have been amazing, and look forward to doing that with you when I'm in town.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks, Josh. Appreciate you carving out this time. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.